Tonight is our season-ending program for spring 2018. We will not have another program until September. I hope all of you will come out for that. We have some wonderful programs planned for next year. Before this season is over, though, we have another event on Saturday, May 12th. That's this Saturday. We are having Stuart Heritage Day in downtown Stuart, put on by Stuart Main Street and with our help. There will be houses open all along Seminole, and you can come to the museum and get a map and go by trolley. You can walk down the river walk. You can go any way you want to go. They will be open from 10 to 2. Right now we have the old Colorado Inn open. We have the Owl House open. We have 22 Seminole Street, which is the office for the new condos that are going in across the street. And we also have the Blue House. We're hoping to have the Lions House open. So there will be a lot to see, including the museum. I want to take the time to thank my board and the volunteers. They've done a fantastic job. We've had one heck of a season. We really had the visitors this year. So thanks to all of them. You may applaud for them. The Lyric Theater is very special to me. I've been coming here since I was a small child, but my grandfather was the contractor who built it, and my dad and my uncle worked on it, and it's been 93 years ago, and Kai had a little trouble the other day. One of the balconies kind of fell off, and she asked me to call my grandfather and tell him he needed to come fix it. Don't think that's going to happen. Before starting the program, and Kai will come out and introduce her guest, I was asked to kind of bring up to date, up to the time of closing, from when the theater was built. It was built in 1925, opened in March of 1926, and it was a movie theater. I don't remember live shows being here very often, but I suppose they did have some back at that time, but it was a movie theater. In 1928, the hurricane came through and blew off the penthouse on top. It did not damage all of the rock, the coquina rock and the stucco, but the penthouse was built of wood, and it did blow it off. I cannot find any information on who lived up there or why it was added, but we do know that it was. Our youth, and most of you out there will know what I'm talking about, spent their Saturdays in this theater. Gloria told me today it cost 14 cents. I don't remember what it cost, but I know it wasn't much because all four of us could get in. And we had popcorn and Coke and candy, and nowadays it would take a week's salary to do that. The ticket booth was out here in what is now the lobby. And I know it changed many times over the years that we came, but we came every Saturday and we watched. The first thing we watched was the news, and we were talking about that too. And I don't remember, we did not have television. I don't remember ever seeing any news except what we saw in here before the cartoon and before the features. We had Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, Gene Autry, Hopalong Cassidy, many, many Westerns. We also, as we got older, we began to get Elvis and Teen Idols, and then Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. And then we got old enough to come on Saturday night instead of coming during the day. How many of you came to movies in this theater as children or adults? There's still a lot of us. We all came to downtown Stuart. Next door was the Greens Dry Goods, Greens Department Store, the Dime Store. Across the street, if you were really lucky, was the Stuart Department Store. And the Rexall Drug was right down the street where you could go for ice cream. It was a wonderful place for a child. I have to remind myself, I don't actually remember when the Lyric closed. I know the Mayfair was open in the 70s. I really couldn't tell you that, and we looked for it today, and Kai may know now, she may have found it. But I know it was in the 70s and the 80s, and we loved this place, and we still do. And so from then on, the people that are here now started the preservation of the Lyric after that time when we went to the Mayfair, and the Lyric eventually became a church. And there is some people here that were highly involved in revitalizing the Lyric into what it is today, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I just love it. So I'm going to call a lady who I think a lot of. She is the executive director of the Lyric Theater and has done a wonderful job, and she's really studied for this tonight. So let's all welcome Kai Fontaine.
Thank you, Mary. What an incredible history, and to know that our executive director of our Stuart Heritage Museum was the granddaughter of the fine gentleman who constructed the Lyric Theater. What an awesome connection to make. Again, I'm Kai Fontaine. I am privileged to be the executive director of this fine establishment, organization, and historic structure located here in downtown Stuart, which really provides a wonderful programming and cultural experience for our community. But tonight, it's more important, and it's my honor and my pleasure to introduce you to this panel of these distinguished gentlemen who really played the major role in preserving the Lyric that we know here today. I'd like to first start with Roy Laycock. Roy grew up in Muncie, Indiana, and went to the University of Miami to study sociology and psychology in 1954. After college, he worked as a pharmaceutical drug rep and worked for an insurance agency. Mr. Laycock became a realtor at the city dock on First Street and bought the first ocean lot for $12,500 and built a beach home at 963 MacArthur Boulevard in 1970. He was the owner of Todd's Restaurant, the former Royal Castle, and the owner of the White City Mercantile in White City on Midway Road. In 1990, he started law school at the age of 55 and graduated at age 60. Roy is currently a realtor in Sundance, Utah. And if I might personally add to his bio, he was the crazy, harebrained idea that saw the Lyric Theater and said, "We gotta save that building." To his right is Richard Geisinger, Jr. Richard is a certified general contractor and real estate broker. He has been involved in construction, retail sales, and development of the residential and commercial real estate throughout his career. Richard is known for his attention to detail when it involves real estate development and design. In addition to teaching real estate law, Richard has sat on many real estate-related committees and has served 2 separate terms as the president of the Realtor Association of Martin County. He was also voted Realtor of the Year in 2004. Richard has been heavily involved in the community. He is a charter member and past president of the YMCA of the Treasure Coast, the Center for the Arts, and served as president of the Lyric Theater from 1988 to 1992. If I'm correct, that was the first president of Friends of the Lyric Incorporated. Oh, I'm sorry, our attorney has corrected me, second president. Recently, he has served as president of the Martin County Taxpayers Association, and in that capacity, he has written numerous articles for the Stuart News on a variety of topics. Please welcome Richard. To his right, our attorney I referenced, Bob Burson. Bob has practiced transactional law on the Treasure Coast since December 1976, following graduation from the University of Florida's College of Law. All you Gator fans, go ahead. Transactional law, as he's quoted, sometimes referred to as dirt and death law, includes real estate transactions, business transactions, and includes the purchase and sale of businesses, wills, trusts, and probate. Bob is an avid Gator, having earned a BSBA degree with honors from UF in 1973 and a Juris Doctorate from UF in 1976. He is board certified by the Florida Bar in the area of real estate law and has an AV rating by the Martindale-Hubbell. He is a member of the Florida Bar and the American Bar and the Martin County Bar Association and is charter and current member of the Real Property Council of Martin County. His community and service includes about 20 years on the board of the Lyric, including serving as charter director, as secretary for several terms, and as president from 1999 to 2001. Bob has been an active member of the Kiwanis Club of Stuart for 39 years and served almost all club positions. He is currently the secretary-elect, website editor, club historian, and is chairman of the annual Pancakes and Reading in the Park. He was involved in the Special Olympics, both locally and on the state level, for almost 20 years. He has also served as charter director, as secretary, and as the 1996 through 1998 president of the Keep Martin Beautiful. Bob is an active amateur photographer and collects old photography and video equipment. And Bob has been married to his high school sweetheart, Joe, for 45 years. Please welcome Bob. To his right at the end, and saving the best for last, maybe? We'll leave that to your questioning. Mike Braid, AKA, as many of you kind of in the downtown fabric now kind of know him as a mayor of downtown Stuart. Mike Braid moved from Brooklyn to Long Island with the help of his parents at the age of 3. Mr. Braid graduated from East Meadow High School on Long Island, gotta say that right for the Long Islanders, in 1967, and from St. John's University in Queens, New York in 1971. He worked for 25 years in the city of New York as a general contractor, working often on landmark buildings. Mr. Braid was active in the industry and community affairs in New York, serving for 15 years as chairman of the contractors and suppliers of the Associated Builders and Owners of the Greater New York Area, vice president of the New York State Builders Association for 7 years, and nearly 10 years as a board member of the National Association of Home Builders, and served by appointment to an 18-member committee representing over 90,000 contractors nationwide. In 1995, Mike purchased a home in Stuart and permanently relocated here in 2000. Please allow me to welcome you, Mike Braid, to the stage. Very recently, the Lyric Theater received a letter. I'd love to read that letter to you today. Dear Queen Lyrica, AKA the Lyric Theater. It's Roy Laycock. Remember me? We were good friends back in the late 80s, and while I have visited you a few times, I have not bothered to write. Please forgive me. In recent years as a realtor in Utah, I have taken to writing letters to buildings. I believe structures have a life force and a personality just like we humans. I certainly have an emotional attachment to you, as I do to my human friends. I have written epistles to a little vintage church in North Carolina, a Rocky Mountain home in Sundance, and a number of other places to which I am deeply attached. Sometimes they write me back. My message is prompted by an invitation from friends of yours to return to Stuart and participate in a forum about the latest chapter in your long and illustrious life. To that end, I would like to ask you to remember with me in that time in 1987, when you were coupled with a new life in Christ Church. They wished to build a new sanctuary in Palm City and were seeking a dowry from someone to become your new partner. I was a local realtor and a preservationist participating in an effort to restore the downtown. It occurred to me that you and the community would make a wonderful couple. I proposed as much to you and the church. They were enthusiastic, as you were. We drafted a commitment agreement. Humans call it a contract. And you and your new partner, the community, began life together. I shall be forever proud of my limited role in your marriage. I am so pleased that you have now been together for over 30 years. I have so many wonderful memories from that time, climbing in the shrouds on your stage, going to the rooftop, and wishing to have a restaurant there, and exploring all of your nooks and crannies. You are indeed a majestic but humble being. I am so honored to call you friend. I am so looking forward to once again being in your presence and discussing with others your iconic role in the community. I envy your constant rebirth and your longevity. You were around before me, and it is my hope that you endure long after my passing. Maybe this letter should remain our secret. I am out of an age of suspected dementia. I know you are extremely busy, but a brief response would be appreciated. Your dear friend, now and always, Roy.
Nice job, man.
I am humbled to be asked to be here this evening. As you all know, I'm only one of hundreds and hundreds of people who have given time, energy, and money to make the lyrics survive. What Kai failed to tell you is that I got a response from the Lyric Theater. I would share it with you. 17 April 2018. Hi, Roy. Sure, I remember you. Your name is memorialized on one of my seats. I am glad that you are coming back to see me. Doesn't seem possible that it has been more than 30 years since you were involved in my world. I appreciate that you recognize that I'm not just an inanimate object without thoughts or feelings, but a living and viable member of the downtown. I do have a longevity potential that exceeds yours, but I am handicapped by being immobile and mute. I am dependent on you and others to voice my message. I am looking forward to the event on May the 8th interested in what you and other friends have to say about me. I am a bit vain, as I think you know. I can vividly recall my grand opening back in the 20s. I was a pretty fancy lady then. Sure glad to have had a facelift recently. I am so privileged to have observed and participated in nearly a century of life on the St. Lucie. I hope you and your friends will plan another event and discuss the happenings of my youth. I understand that you are guiding a workshop in Utah about writing one's life story. Since I obviously cannot do my own, I thought you might encourage some talented individual to write and publish a narrative about me. Also, recently, I have become aware of and listened to a lot of podcasts. Do you think there could be a voice of the lyric, interviewing coming performers and telling stories about me? I was amused by you calling me Queen Lyrica. I think of myself more as a mother than a queen. I feel a responsibility to look after all the friends of the lyric. When you are in town, we shall share a liter of Dom Perignon in the green room. Looking forward to it. Your forever friend, Mother Lyric. In or about 1978, the Stuart City Commission created an ad hoc committee called the Community Redevelopment Agency, I believe, to study the possible preservation and restoration of downtown Stuart. We decided, and I became the chairman of that committee, we decided to have a charrette. And in case you're not familiar with the term, it's somewhat of an architectural term about creating a symposium to study a particular developmental project. These are some of the words that I shared at that charrette in 1978. The redevelopment effort in downtown Stuart can be characterized in two words: potential and inertia. Let's talk about potential. Do we have it? You bet we do. Stuart is a scenic waterfront community with an ideal climate, attracting people from both north and south. I-95 is finally coming to our town from both directions. The long-proposed regional mall is under construction. The courthouse is still downtown. The New York Mets are coming to South St. Lucie County. Population forecasts predict our area to be one of the fastest growing in the country through the balance of the century. There is even hope for a new Roosevelt Bridge in the not-too-distant future. All these factors are working to create a new urban environment which should precipitate the survival and prosperity of downtown Stuart. How about inertia? Do we have it? I think so. It could be said that we've always been for progress as long as it didn't cost anything and it didn't change anything. When considering possible courses of action, one should always consider the possibility of doing nothing. It requires minimal time and expense, and it frequently works. It is an option which our town has developed and perfected. This is not necessarily bad. Many communities who consider themselves progressive have made multi-million-dollar mistakes in their downtown area. To date, we have done nothing wrong because we have done nothing. Let me take you back to the ambiance of 1978 in downtown Stuart, Florida. And I'm not sure that I can see a show of hands, but I'm curious about how many of you lived in Stuart, Florida in 1978. That's pretty good. That's better than I expected. I guess I don't need to take you all back. But if you didn't, downtown Stuart was in its doldrums. It was said that you could fire off a cannon on Osceola and not hit anybody. There were a segment of the population that thought the downtown should be destroyed, the courthouse should move to the suburbs, and any art center that we created should be brand new and in the suburbs as well. We had a hardcore group of preservationists who did not agree with that philosophy, and we attempted to on numerous occasions to have art shows and different events that would draw the public to downtown Stuart. we were mostly unsuccessful. That is until one fall, just prior to school, someone said, let's have a battle of the bands. And we did. We had a battle of the bands, and I can't tell you why, but instead of 100 people coming to downtown Stuart, we had in excess of 2,000. But we were logistically limited and we ran out of beer. But we were exuberant because the community had exhibited an enthusiasm for the redevelopment of the downtown. With this as a backdrop, I had this crazy idea that, let me back up just a bit. I recall vividly walking out of my office and my office mate, Leo Galante, saying to me, "Hey, Roy, where are you going?" And I said, "I think I'll go by the Lyric Theater." He said, "Do you have any money?" And I said, "No." But I, as a realtor, I had been able to envision the downtown shopping area as a boutique shopping mall. Well, I had pretty much been able to envision what it is today, if I may brag a bit. And additionally, that the Lyric Theater was the potential anchor for that shopping area, and consequently, I drafted a contract. The second thing, being a realtor, I knew that the first step in the acquisition of property was to gain control of the property, which is usually done by contract. So I came that afternoon to meet with the New Life in Christ Church, the present owners of the theater, and I was, let me give credit where credit's due. The church immediately recognized that there were not too many purchasers of old downtown theaters, and they also, of course, realized the public benefit of what I was proposing. And I made it clear to them that even though the contract was in my name, or as assigns, that the goal was to purchase the theater and transfer it to a 501c3 corporation known as the Friends of the Lyric. There were a couple of issues in the contract that were critical. They allowed us a 6-month closing date, and they allowed us use of the theater during the times that the church wasn't using it for fundraising purposes. And they also made the $5,000 earnest money deposit refundable. Well, I didn't have $5,000, as I had told Leo, but I put $500 in the hat and set out Osceola Street to Gay's Jewelry, and the retailers, and Bob Burson, attorney, and got 9 individuals or entities who would put $500 in the hat that afternoon, and we had a consummated contract. We called a press conference, and we advised the community what we planned to do, and the acquisition, and let me emphasize that, there are 2 phases to this process, acquisition and operation, and I, being a realtor, was all about the acquisition, not about the operation, and I have people here, gentlemen here with me this evening that are going to talk about the operation of the theater. Let me close by saying this story is but an incident in a much larger and more important narrative. The big story takes place over years and is about the subsequent preservation and operation of the Lyric. It involves hundreds of people, too many to name, stepping forward and contributing their knowledge and skill as needed to make the Lyric the icon that it is today. These folk did not seek acclaim nor recognition. They unselfishly gave of themselves in a community effort that should make us all proud. Any periodic happening to honor the Lyric should not be viewed as a culmination, but merely as a milestone. The process of preservation is continually fragile. Its strength is derived only from the courage and perseverance of those who revere and practice it. Today, we are invited to remember. Tomorrow, our ongoing commitment of time and energy will be required to ensure that the Lyric may long endure. Thank you.
My name is Richard Geisinger, and I guess I should publicly recognize Roy, because without Roy, we probably wouldn't be here. Roy's vision and a couple phone calls got us all involved, and it was kind of interesting. I can actually remember the day. Roy called me up and said, "Hey, Richard, I got this contract on the Lyric, and we need to go to the bank and borrow some money. Are you in?" And long story short, he said yes, right. I've had very many people ask me what was it like back then trying to not only acquire but to run the theater. And when I started thinking about making this presentation, there's really two words that come to mind, and it's bittersweet. And I think that probably most of the board members of that time would maybe say the same thing. It wasn't very glamorous. The downtown was in such disrepair that vacancies were probably up around 80 or 90%. And when we announced that we were going to do this, people questioned why they would want to give money to a downtown that was in disrepair in a building that was in disrepair because of a dream and a vision. And it really took a lot of passion to get through that initial time. Just a couple stories. We realized right away that none of us knew how to operate a theater. And we just knew that we needed to preserve it because we felt in the long term it would add to what I refer to now as the jewel of Martin County, which I think the downtown is. We had some friends that were in the arts world: Babs Case, Ginger, Baldwin, Dottie, a whole bunch of volunteers that came in and helped us. And we knew that we had to get out and present. We knew we had to hire artists and bring them in. And since we were very low on cash, we were very fearful of making mistakes. So I was telling this to the group last night. It was the first rather large event we had was Rita Coolidge, and I don't know how many people know who Rita Coolidge is, but she was a terrific performer. And Rita had not been out performing for years, and for some reason she made a decision to come and perform here at the Lyric. So it was a very special evening for her and for us as well. And at that time the theater sat about 600 people, and I imagine about 500 people were in the theater. And she literally rocked the house. I mean, if you've not been up on the Lyric stage and you can get permission to do this after this is over, you ought to come up here and see what they see. The audience it's such a warm feeling. You're right in front of them. So she did an unbelievable performance, and we were all in tears. And we thought about two things, actually. One is the building was in such disrepair, and there was plaster on the ceiling, and the sound of the bass scared us that the plaster was going to come down and land on people's heads. And when people asked me, was it stressful that the theater may not make it, and my answer was yeah, but it was more stressful thinking about what could happen to people on the inside of the theater. That night, though, when we saw her perform, to me was a turning point. Before that, it was a question as to whether or not we could make this work. When you were sitting in the audience watching her perform, seeing how the audience reacted, seeing how she reacted, it just gave us that boost that we needed to kind of affirm to ourselves that this could work. The church was a great seller. They cooperated with us in just about everything we asked them to do. What they weren't great at, though, is taking care of the building. They had a vision themselves to build a new building out in Palm City. So when we acquired the Lyric, there was a lot of disrepair, and the roof leaked. I mean, leaked to the point, again, that we thought the plaster was going to come down. When Roy was talking about Andres Duany, who is now an internationally recognized city planner, This was in the, I guess, the beginning of his career, and he made his presentation here at the Lyric, and the theater was packed. And there was the largest rainstorm I had seen in years, of course. He had a projector up here, and it was actually dripping on the projector. I actually had to leave the theater because I was so nervous about something dropping down on somebody's head. But this is what we went through in the initial stages when we were, putting on these performances. I'll never forget, we had Blood, Sweat, and Tears come here, and we were still very naive about what we needed to do. And I got a call. All of us were working full-time, and I got a call and saying that they needed somebody to load in the band. I didn't even know what that meant, and they explained it to me, and I called Bob, my friend, and I said, "Hey, Bob, we got to go load in Blood, Sweat, and Tears." We both left our offices, came over here, and there's a semi-truck out there full of equipment.
Heavy equipment.
Heavy equipment, right? So the things you experience, I guess that's the bittersweet. We went through a very steep learning curve. We had a very strong business community leader come out and basically tell the world through the press that we shouldn't have acquired the theater, that it should have been in Palm City. All those things that make it a little bit more difficult. And the other thing that we actually learned was that it was easier to raise money to acquire the theater than it was to pay off the debt. And that's something we had to live with for years. And it was a tough lesson to learn. The sweet part of the story, now when we see what the theater has turned into as a result of hundreds of hours and hundreds of people making it what it's meant to be, is in my personal life, I was not married at the time that we did this theater, and I had got married later in life and had 2 daughters, and my daughters grew up to play classical music. Make a long story short, they have performed on this stage probably more than a dozen times with orchestras, with quartets. And it was just, I had a chance to have this discussion with the former executive director. It was so interesting for me to experience being part of this in the beginning of its conversion life, and see my daughters be able to play in the theater. Now they're off in college and doing very well in their classical music, but it was an interesting circle for me to see that, and I'm very proud to have been part of that. There are so many people to thank that helped us get through this period of time that I can't even begin to do it. I've often said that you get closest to the people that you go through tough times with, and I think that all of us and the original board remained very close friends for a long time, and we still remain friends today. I just want to thank them, and also thank the hundreds of people that have made this work. Thank you very much.
Okay, so here's a different strain on this. I get to talk about the exciting part about what the heck we did here to take it from the, what he described before to more or less where it came in years later. But let me start off also by thanking Roy, who told me the biggest lie I've ever had in my life. He came in and said, "I want to talk to you about the Lyric Theater, and it won't take any of your time." Well, tonight it's already taken an hour, Roy. But over the years, it was a real joy. I mean, we worked hard. I mean, we really worked hard, and it puts a lot of stress on us, but it was worth it in the long run. We talked about what the town looked like at the time. Let me give you a quick overview of what the theater looked like itself. Outside looked like a war zone. I mean, there was no paint on it for years, and it just was horrible. The lobby was divided into church classrooms. They had taken it and cut it up with doors on it so they could have classes out there. There was on that end, there was a little room that was raised up, and that's where we had our board meetings. It was big enough for about 4 people, and we put 7 of us in there every Monday when we sat there to try to decide who we're going to hire for the next show. We used Phantasma Productions out of West Palm with Bob Rossi. Does that name just make you start sweating? So that's what we would do. That's the little room that was down there. It was later, the walls were cut off, and they used it for a stage. So some of the photos you see behind us, you'll see quartets or whatever sitting there on the stage. That used to be our board meeting room. But that was the lobby, and it was nothing fancy to look at, trust me. When you came in here, all the seats were these blue seats, and I'm sure you're seeing those behind us too. What the church had done was they basically used the downstairs, and if a chair broke downstairs, they went up and got parts off the ones up there and brought them down here. So they had piecemeal chairs together, so it's fairly poorly, it was hard to sit. Underneath here, there is a basement. I don't know if you've ever been to the basement, but there was one way in and one way out, and that was just past those curtains. There was a door that went down, and it went down some pretty good steep stairs, and those stairs were not exactly safety in mind. There was no handrails on them, they were steep, and the light switch was down in the basement. So it was risky business going down there, and that's why we didn't use it for quite a while. And the church literally left it jammed with stuff. We had a work day here one day, and we literally filled a huge dumpster out there and still had more to go. But it was just one of those things. They used it for decades, not only the church, but others who had used it just for junk. The back wall was about 8 inches past this screen. So imagine, if you will, see where this curtain is? Think about how much room there's between the two of them. How are you going to put an orchestra of risers in that space? How are you going to put the sets for shows in that space? You can't. So we had to leave the drapes open and bring them, out here like this. Roof access, Richard talked about the roof. He said it was leaking it wasn't leaking, it was pouring. It was like a disaster. This whole stage was wet and it was coming down. So that's one of the first things we had to handle. And so we got, the person in Palm City. Anyway, we got somebody to come in and they sealed the roof for us. But to get the roof was very risky because there's back up in here and over there, there's ways you have to climb up, and again, not safety in mind. Just so many parts of this thing were in poor shape. The restrooms, I don't know if you remember the restrooms, but the restrooms are still the same doors, but they're very small, very, very small. On this side over here, there is now a room where they have a restroom. I'm talking about right on the street, but that room was long, and it went down and touched the back of the restrooms down there. Eventually what we did was we brought it back this way, made a shorter dressing room in there for the artists, and enlarged the restroom for the women. The stage was soft, it was cushy. One of the first things we did after a couple of performances, because they were telling us that their equipment was bouncing on the stage, we came in and put plywood down and, thick plywood and painted it. But the church, on some of those photos, if you notice, do you see the one where it's got the big butterfly? Have you noticed that one? Above, it would be above us here. They had lowered this down with a frame and a big butterfly on it, but you'll also notice that photo, there's steps leading up here. They had a very neat system where they can close it in like this, or they had 2 big sections, which they were probably, 8 or 10 feet across, or if not more, and they'd pull them out and take them out to the wings, and that would reveal the steps. And then when they wanted it closed like this, they would just put the things back on top. Well, we just sealed those off. So below us are still the stairs. If you open this top up and pull off the front, you could take it out and have stairs coming up. And there's, a 3-person orchestra pit below us here too, somewhere. I've never been in it. Kai has. She said she climbed down there. So that's what it was looking like at the beginning. It was pretty pathetic. One of the things that we had whenever we were performing was lights and sound did not exist in the theater. for every show, we had to go and hire and rent from a company in Jupiter all the lights and sound for the show. So not only did we have the shows loading in that day, the lights and sound guys had to be here and load in the day before or that night, and before the sound checks and all like that. So it was a lot of moving parts that you don't necessarily have to have now. I went off the board after 3 years, so I was off from 91 to 94, and I came back on in 94, and the theater was just completing a project of about $96,000 to $100,000, and I really don't know what that was about. But in 94, we started a 3-phase renovation of the theater. And most of these were all of this was funded by grants from the state. And I'm gonna look down for a minute because I don't want to miss what we did, so you can follow through kind of how we progressed through the construction phases. The first phase was 1994. Scammell Constructors was the contractor. There is a projection booth up there. It was in pretty bad shape, and we rebuilt that. We bought some film equipment, the projectors and things like that, so we can use that. New theatrical rigging, some of the lights and things like that. The new curtain that goes across here, they call it the Grand Drape. We acquired that. Structural repairs were done, and a lot of other theater improvements, including some of the truss work was repaired. That's what's holding that ceiling in above us. And we also got a new ceiling. And I remember, as if it was yesterday, all those scaffoldings up here and those guys going up there, and I don't like heights, and these guys were making me nervous, but they did it all, put in a whole new plaster, and they covered over some of the cracks that made Richard and me sweat for so many hours. I mean, literally, one of the concerts that had a very hard bass sound, Richard and I stood at that back watching a crack. We sat there and watched the whole concert like this because we were ready to sound the alarm that the ceiling's coming down. But in this project in 94 is when they cured that. Now, that was all done by $462,300 in grants from the state. Well, they immediately applied for another grant during the process for $358,000, and that came about the next year in 95. And in that project, we actually hired somebody who would be an oversee project. We hired R.J. Heisenbottle Architects, and he was a project manager for that. He said it's going to take about 90 days, and so we ended up closing for the summer. And of course, one of the things that bothered us was we can't have any income coming in during that 90 days. How are we going to do it? So we looked around and tried to figure out what we were going to do, and ended up going ahead and closing. We looked at alternatives of splitting it up into 2 years and all like that, but we went ahead and did it in 1 year, closed for the 2 years, for the summer. That work included all new electrical throughout the theater, all new air conditioning units, and interior lighting was all replaced. And then Heisenbottle, at the end of the project, gave a written report, and he said, this is what you need to do for the next phase. Seats, remember we still had the blue seats. A mansard roof over here, because at the time, those mansard roofs, which are now barrel clay tiles, that was asphalt shingles in there that were really in bad shape. And here's one, concrete columns and beams that have deteriorated due to water intrusion. Just about every beam in this building he was looking at. And the next thing was he recommended stage 4. Well, they applied for that grant. And phase 3, we applied for new seating. We applied for the mansard roof replacement and ADA upgrades for dressing rooms and bathrooms. We received $317,900 from the state, and we did exterior structural repairs on the mansard roof, ADA code enhancements to the restrooms, to the public restrooms, not the backstage. And at that time, there was only one backstage, and it was right over here. And I don't know of anybody who ever really used it. It was kind of weird. We improved backstage restrooms and dressing areas and interior seat lighting. In that phase, Donald Armstrong was hired as the architect. And he did some initial drawings, and it provided for the renovation of the basement. It's exactly what it is now. So Donald Armstrong was architect of that. Enlargement of the restrooms. This restroom over here was pushed back over here into this area, and this restroom was pushed back over here. Our original box office was over on this side. There's an office there now and the restroom. But that used to be a long room in there also, similar to the one over here. And we we had a window in there for people to come in and buy tickets right off the sidewalk. And all of that was renovated in there, which I haven't checked it out lately, but the biggest problem with that, putting the theater manager's office there next to the restroom, was twofold. And they all relate to sound and smells. You figure it out. It didn't stay as the office manager's office for long. At that time, the grant did not include seats. So we went into at the same time, because the renovation was going on, we decided we need to get some new seats for the downstairs for the orchestra. So we went into a $35,000 fundraising campaign, and we were selling seat namings for $500 each, and we were selling quite a few of them. But then a good stroke of luck came in. Ruth Hoke from, what's the little town? Ocean Breeze Park. Donated to us stock in First National Bank, which was not at the time. We sold the next day at the height of the market. And we got the money to buy the seats. And that's how the seats came in for downstairs. So we got rid of the blue, but we still had the old blues upstairs. That theater, all of that renovation, we closed for another summer. And remember, when we closed, let me explain something. We were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to renovate this theater. It was not coming from our pockets or from contributions or from ticket sales. It was coming from grants. The contributions of memberships of the theater and ticket sales and all like that, it was a razor-thin margin when you started to pay the bills. There were many, many times when it was like, you get a call, Bob, whoever on the other end, we got a performance this week, and Florida Power just going to turn off our power. We got to go raise $500 or $1,000. That was not uncommon. We were razor thin on operating expenses during this whole time. Even though we were making major renovations, it was a very stressful situation. In May, or right around May of 1998, our property next door was leveled. There was an old building there. And, it was just a one-story building. And the owner of it was Richard and Dana Kibbe. And I had known them. I had represented them when they purchased it and that kind of thing. And I had told him then, if they ever want to sell it, the Lyric is your buyer. So when I heard that they had torn it down, I called them, and they said, what'd you tear it down for? And they said, well, we were going to build 3 stories up there. We're going to put a cigar bar and this kind of stuff, and we've got plans working on like that. And I said, wait a minute. Before you do that, would you consider selling it to the Lyric? And within 24 hours, I got it called back and said, we'll sell it to you for what we've got into it. It was $200,000. So the next board meeting was coming up, and our secretary, our treasurer was sitting there, Dave Skiles, a great guy. He was sitting there, and he gave a 10, 15-minute presentation on how razor thin our finances are and how we all as directors have to, not should, but have to go out and raise money immediately. He finished his presentation, and they went to new business. I raised my hand. We need to buy the lot next door for $200,000. Dave looked at me, closed his file, and said, Bob, you haven't heard a damn thing I've said, have you? I went, Dave, I said, the problem is this. We can buy any property in the world, and it won't make a difference to the success of the Lyric. That 30-foot wide lot behind us is the only one that will ever matter. And if something else is built there, it'll be 100 years before the Lyric gets a chance to expand. So with that in mind, we started talking about it and started looking into it, and we talked to an architect about, the engineers about, can we knock out that back wall? Because remember, the back wall was only about 10 feet back here, and we didn't know if it was structural at all. There were big beams going up and all like this, and it was kind of frightening, but they said, yeah, we think you can do it. They analyzed it. Okay, well, now we still haven't gotten money. We don't know how we're going to pay for this, so that fall is when Lucy Corley, our executive director, resigned to go to the United Way. And so we went on a job hunt for a new executive director. And one of the things that we had three major things for the executive director had to agree that they'd be willing to do. And John Lesser said he could do all three. And the major one in there was he had to get the money to buy the lot next door. So that was John's first calling. I mean, that was his first job, major thing that he was needed to do. That was John started March 30th of that year. In November, we had the property bought. $200,000 from an entity that didn't have enough money to pay the utilities on a regular basis. But the way we did that was two families each contributed to it. Jack and Helen Fine and Hattie Mae Douglas. They each contributed the funds to buy that. And with that, it was a big difference. So that's where we are after we were doing the renovations. All these renovations by grants were being done without any expectation of owning the property next door. So now we have, okay, now what are we going to do? Okay, well, as it is, we've got to have another phased fundraising. So at this time, we've got John and we've got some people who know how to do these things. So they put together a big brochure and they did a press release. I mean, we had a press conference here. We had representative, no, I can't remember the representative from Port St. Lucie. Anyway, we had a bunch of people here in the press and all like that, and started a $2,500,000 fundraising campaign. It was to include enough to build the building, build a addition on the back, and do some other things around here that needed to be done, and set aside $1 million for endowment so we could pay the bills on a regular basis and have things under control for quite a while. Well, we got through a bunch of that. Phase one, this was a two-phase. Phase one was done by two different contractors, the Contract Service Enterprises and Masterpiece Builders. In that project is when we put the elevator in. We took up, I don't know if you know this, but the seats up, remember those old blue seats that were up there? There was no leg room at all. They were tight. So we completely destroyed the upstairs, took away all the risers and made them deeper so that when you sit, you have more leg room in front of you. So we went from 600 seats to about 500. And the elevator up there where it comes in upstairs actually lost as much seats too. There's a storage room up there. But that was all built at that time. So we got a lot of lights and sound at that time of that project, and that phase one. And then phase two, that was in 1999 when that finished. 2001, phase two kicked in, and that was the building of knocking out the back wall. And on some of the photos, you can see where the box was built in the back, the concrete walls and all like that. And that's kind of where we go there. And I'm going to leave the rest. I may have overstepped what you're going to talk on, but I got on a roll.
You got nothing.
He got nothing. But as a contractor,
So now that all the hard work was done, the new guys in town got to enjoy the maintenance and the ripping out the chairs and the tarring the roof. And I think the greatest achievement that you guys had was saving this theater has enabled people like myself who were newcomers to be a part of something, part of the community, and to meet people and to get together and have work days. And I mean, I'll tell you, it was a godsend for someone like myself who was pretty much always active where I was, and it wasn't hard to be active in New York. But here, I didn't know anybody, and, you know, right away, thrown into the pool, and right away, I know everybody, and the work was secondary, you know, but, and everybody before us really made this happen, and I knew how important the theater was to the community. it's the centerpiece of the county. And, you know, along the way here, in this almost 20 years that I've been here, I don't know if that's appreciated by as many people as it should be. I mean, obviously, everybody who comes to the theater loves the theater, but it's so unique to have a great little theater like this, and then to have all of my predecessors who made it happen, which is a miracle. But then to have someone like John Lesser and Kai and the people that actually managed to keep acts coming in. And they've had, for a 500-seat theater, and again, we don't really sell 500 seats mostly. I mean, there are a few, you know, we just don't. But to have such a small venue and the amount and the acts that we got, I mean, of course, a lot of them were on their way out, but that they were, or they were on their way up, or they were on their way out. I mean, you know, when you think about some of the people that were here, I mean, when you think about one of the greatest ones I remember, I hope some of you, was anybody here for the Mickey Rooney show? His greatest line was, I mean, they show his whole film career, 5 years in a row, he was the #1 attraction in the world. And we're all familiar with his movies and his stuff, and here he is, about 80 years old, I think, was when he was here. And he says, after all of that success and how many marriages he had and all his money going away, and but he said it in such a cute way and said, "Here I am at the Lyric Theater." So, but the truth of the matter was, we were lucky to even get him at that stage. But we've had some wonderful times, and you know, it takes a community. It takes a lot of people. I think the first gala event I went to was when we had the Beach Boys here for I think it was the 75th anniversary, where we closed off the street and we had the tent by City Hall.
Yeah.
Were you here for that, Roy?
I was there, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what a community event. I mean, you know, it's just, and I've loved it. I think it's been continuing along with the construction. After building the major addition here, which took an awful lot of work, an awful lot of bidding, and then to come in here and find out that, you know, this is falling apart, and the engineers starting to open up columns and finding out that they're just hollow, the steel is gone, and which we found out was actually indicative of buildings that were built in the 20s. They were using the salt water from the river, or the brackish water from the river, and you're sealing in all the salt and it just gave a great start to the steel. But it took a lot of work to put this building back in structurally to a sound building. But and the lobby change, and you know. So what I can say is it's had a good run, and I think the shape it's in now, and with the community interest now, I think it's got a long history. And thank you, Roy, for the start.
Bring the house lights up, and we'll be glad to answer a couple questions if you all have some. But we can't see a thing.
Any questions of the panel, or any stories that anybody has of their experiences and their time here at the Lyric Theater that you'd like to share or ask?
Any first dates in the theater?
Yeah. Did they have silent movies here? And did they have an organ here?
Yes, interestingly enough, on the history of the Lyric Theater, when it was built by Judge Hancock, Judge Hancock's wife was a piano instructor as well as an organist. And just for a point of reference of either how much he loved his wife or how important an organ was to a silent movie and vaudeville house at the time that the Lyric was built in the 20s. So it was built in 1926, and talkies did not come out until 1928. The cost of construction was reported to be $100,000 in 1925 and 1926, and it is reported in news articles that the cost of the organ that was installed here at the Lyric Theater was $12,000. I understand that at another point in time, in talking with Bob and Richard last night, that there was an attempt to try to put back an organ during the very early days of Friends of the Lyric. Bob?
It's true.
It's true.
Yes, we received an offer from a gentleman who had a very substantial, very large pipe organ in his house in Miami Beach, right on Brickell Avenue. Coconut Grove, actually, is what it was. And he invited us to take this organ, so we went down. I mean, there was 5 or 6 of us went down, and we saw this thing, and it was massive. And this is in the guy's house. I mean, holy cow. And it had pipes, and he had a separate room that were air conditioned just for the pipes and all like this. And it was a small room, it was a substantial size room. And so, how can you turn down an offer of a free organ that's been appraised at anywhere between $80,000 and $100,000, and you're a theater? You can't. So we took it. We never put it in. We stored it for about a year and a half, until our architect for the next venue sent us a letter saying, about that organ, it's not going to fit anywhere with what you need. And we got to talking about it, and we said, how many times do we have shows in here that require a big pipe organ? And it was like, never.
That was before the request of all the Hammond organs that we have to produce for rock and roll artists.
Oh, really? A pipe organ? Well, anyway, we ended up, with his permission, of the donor's permission, selling it to somebody. And he actually approved everything about it. So it found a good home.
That was Hal Durant.
Yes.
You know, interesting what Bob was saying about the stage. When we first acquired the theater, we were naive in terms of what you need to have a successful theater. We just thought it was a theater, it was going to be good, right? Well, the stage was so narrow because it wasn't designed for performances. That's why the importance of the acquisition and making the stage, you know, deeper. It was so narrow that you couldn't hardly do anything with it. And as a result of their hard effort, they acquired the land and made it a very functioning theater.
And to the point of running the theater today, without that expansion of adding the backstage, I'd like to point out something that hasn't been pointed out previously. There was no bathroom for artists backstage. There was no bathroom in what was reportedly used as the backstage in the basement. And the early board members, does anybody want to share any of their stories of what you had to do with artists that had to use a restroom?
Well, for many years we did have for many years we did have a restroom, as I kind of described before, but it's right there in that corner. But if you, Richard, you remember, it was kind of like, it was sketchy. But there was no water, and you couldn't get a drink or anything back there. It was just, I mean, it was right where that curtain is, and that's all we had. You couldn't do anything. So we got some people to loan us their lobbies, their offices up here, and they'd let us go in there. And of course, it was after hours, so they had their air conditioner off, of course. You know, why not? You know, they got Leo Kottke coming for the concert, and he's going to sit up there and get nice and warm before the theater. So, before the show. So that's what we did. We'd take them around over here, go up the elevator, the little crossover, and take them up to somebody's office up there and sit there and wait for them. And you know, until you sat one-on-one with an artist whose head is as big as a mountain and try to carry on chit-chat with him, it's an experience. You know, Matt Guitar Murphy will talk your head off, and that's no problem. But some of these people were just crazy. They were like, "Why are you bothering me?" But anyway, that's where our conveniences were for couple of years between renovations here was in other off-site locations.
And that backstage expansion really opened a whole new world for presenting and programming, not only for bringing in national or international acts, but it really expanded the world of offering for our local community groups. And I'd like to point out that the local community groups, from Kiwanis to women's clubs, they were really the groups that kept the lights on and kept the theater, as we call in the business, from going dark. These community and civic groups and high school choral organizations, they were really the ones that were providing programming, yet there was no house to space them in. You know, where do these choral groups live in the wing space while they're waiting for the performance to start? So this second vision of seeing this building, which then became a vacant lot, and adding on to a backstage, allowed for us to really be able to do what we do it every day, which is kind of what we call a roadhouse. So we're a roadhouse. We're not a producing theater. We're not like some of the theaters around here that build sets and props and costumes and hire actors and actresses and bands and musicians and put on, you know, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, or My Fair Lady, or Cats. We're a roadhouse, so we're looking for those artists that are kind of traveling throughout Florida and looking for venues to present themselves. And by having this backstage, it really allowed for us to have the, you know, New York Philharmonic Orchestra here on one day with 102 musicians and a piano, and the very next day to have a Leo Kottke with just a guitar on the stage. So that expansion really allowed for us to really differentiate our program and offer something for everybody in the community, as well as being able to house our Florida Arts and Dance Company, our Dance Works companies, all of these local production companies that really give our youth and our citizens an opportunity to explore performing arts and give them a stage and an opportunity to present them. So the backstage was tremendous, as well as adding a wonderful restroom facility back there for everybody to be able to use. And I'd like to point out, if you've never gone for a tour of the Lyric, there is only one restroom backstage, and there is only, with one toilet and one hand sink. And there is only one toilet and one hand sink, which actually lives underneath the staircase, which services what we lovingly call the star dressing room. Any questions? Any other questions for the panel? You're an easy crowd today. Oh, I see a hand from Sandy. We're going to get called out from the historian.
What are you doing now? The wall is knocked down.
On the exterior of the building. Going back to, I think, Mike's point of how construction in the 1920s was not the construction that we know here today. In the 2015 renovations, which was the last renovation, which gave the Lyric all of these beautiful jewels and accessories, as we started to peel back the layers of the wall, we uncovered, as these previous groups of lovers of the Lyric, the structural headers and structural columns from the use of river sand and river water had begun to spool. Recently, we had a production here, and thank God, we had all of the theater gods on our side that night. We had a theater production here. We had Wings to Fly Dance Company. It was about 30 minutes before a performance, and we heard this absolutely ungodly crash, bang, boom. Why you see all of these, what I'm calling braces, these screw jacks that are holding up the balconette on the exterior of the building, and you see the plastic that's covering up the exterior of the building, is basically the same principle. Those balconettes were installed and added onto the Lyric Theater in the 20s, in 1925 and 1926. They have had some repair because we found different types of aggregate concrete that were used within the one balconette. But in essence, from water intrusion, river sand, river water, and non-Florida building code techniques as we know them today that were utilized, literally a portion of the balconette just detached from the building and came crashing down on the sidewalk. And the most fortunate part was that we did not have anybody damaged, no property was damaged, no cars were injured. And we are currently working with a structural engineer, the same structural engineer that was with us on site during the 2015 capital campaign and renovations, as well as that contractor. that are trying to determine. If you look very carefully at those balconets, and the reason why all of them now are secured, is the balconets, the heaviest portion of these balconets, where these gorgeous urns are located on the upper portion of the balustrades that you see. There is a pencil rod of rebar that's holding the top of those balustrades, and then you'll see 3 support brackets underneath those balconets. Those 3 support balconets all have one solid piece of rebar that's going back into the building, and none of them are tied into a structural header or a structural column. So, yes, Sandy, yes. Of course, we didn't think about those things when it was built in the early 20s, and so we've gone ahead and embraced all of them while we are working with the structural engineer in an effort to find ways to still honor the historic look and character of those balconets, but using modern day techniques. So we're looking at the styrofoam and plastered covered techniques for the balustrades as well as the urns. And we are looking at taking a little bit of historic liberty. I've been talking to a lot of my historic preservationists about ways that we can tie back in the upper portion of the balconet back into a structural column, which does run along each side of those balconets. So that's kind of why we look at a little bit in disrepair. You'll probably be hearing from us at the Lyric Theater about needing you yet again to help us continue to preserve and maintain the Lyric Theater that we know today. Any other questions?
This beautiful interior, is this mimicking the original design in the 1920s, or is this based on any previous design, or is this kind of an original work of art?
The unfortunate part about the history of the Lyric Theater is nobody took the time to take a photo of the interior of the theater when it was first built. We have really no interior photos of the Lyric Theater until you get to about the 70s time period. So all of these arches are cues that are taken from the time period that the building was built, which was in the 1920s, which was the era of Art Nouveau. And if you look very carefully on the exterior of the building, we have these beautiful recessed arches on the exterior where the fruit bowl lives inside. And we decided to take kind of those visual cues to give a little ambiance to the inside of the theater so it wasn't flat wall or textured wall. But what that also worked for us so well was, believe it or not, these are recessed about 2.5 to 3 inches, which gives just enough breathing room for you to have a little bit of elbow space, because if you had been here in the Lyric Theater before in the past, when you were against the wall, you were against the wall. So this allowed for us to kind of recess it back a little bit. We used some paint to kind of give you a depth perception so it appeared as though it went back a little bit further. But no, this is all just visual cues that we had from the exterior of the building and trying to really kind of honor without mimicking anything that we could not historically document. Thank you. Any other questions?
I have one. None of the 4 of us were here during the most recent renovation. You were.
That's why she's answering your questions.
I know.
This last renovation was crazy. Because the whole intent of the renovation, the whole capital campaign was really kind of 3 phases. First phase, pay off all debt. Second phase, be able to dress her up a little bit, so kind of the interior of the theater looked and matched kind of the caliber of the artists that were performing on the stage. If you guys remember the Lyric before this last set of renovations, it was anything that everybody could do to save the building and get a little bit of money and make a repair and do something with the building. So there was wainscoting walls that were in the lobby, there was rough textured plaster and stucco on the interior, which didn't really lend itself well to the acoustics here in the facility. So, and the third phase of that was to create an endowment or a pot of money for us to bring in international acts and really kind of preserve us for the future. The unfortunate part is what we thought was going to be a really simple renovation and just replacing seats and putting up some drywall and adding some paint and architectural elements. As we started to peel back the layers of the walls, we encountered that the structural headers and the structural columns within the lobby of the Lyric were in extreme disrepair. So much as if you were in Stuart in that time, we kind of looked like New York City. We had this massive scaffolding and we had a pass-through so people could utilize the sidewalk. Well, all that was absolutely extremely needed and necessary because we literally had a structural engineer that was living on site, I say, because he was basically directing us column by column, header by header, what we could chisel out. And when I tell you chisel out, normally when you remove a structural column or a header, you need a jackhammer and a couple men, and it takes a while. You could take just a hammer and start to knock at these structural columns and headers, and it would just spool and fall apart in between your fingers. We very quickly, because we were only supposed to be closed for about 3 or 4 months during the summer, again following our previous pacts of our friends at the Lyric Theater, we were only going to close for the summer so we could be open for season and continue to operate and do what we do, because without shows there's not a cash flow and we can't continue to keep the lights on and the doors open. We very quickly discovered that this 3-month process was going to take much longer. So much to the point of we had already scheduled Clint Black to be our opening act in November, to where we actually had to have the construction crews working 24/7 around the clock to be able to get us to at least have drywall, seats in, and carpeting in to open in time. We had to find quick drying concrete. We had to have rebar installed. It was a nightmare of a process, and like the generations before us, we all had many sleepless nights, a lot of fears, and a lot of prayers, just simply to say, can we please make sure that we open the theater, save her bones, and preserve her for another 90 years. Any other questions? I think I saw a hand up back there.
One upstairs.
And there's one upstairs. All right. I don't know if I'm that good. How loud are you upstairs?
Mary Jones or Alice Lockhart, that's here in the building, might be able, or Sandy, who's here in the building, are kind of our resident historians, might be able to talk a little bit about this penthouse. The only thing that I know of it is that it was located on the roof of the Lyric and that it was blown off during the 1928 hurricane. Yes. Alex?
Yes, September 1928.
February?
September 1928.
September 1928. And do you know if that was used for residential or commercial
What I
purposes?
found, it was a party house. Again, it was the roaring 20s, so before a show, after a show, it could be selected VIPs.
Oh, so that's where you could actually get the alcohol.
Could be taken up there for a party time.
Did you hear that answer? Yes, sir.
I find it kind of amazing that a small venue like this is able to attract talent like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, which is such a big band. And I know they're not cheap. How do you?
You pay them.
No. I've got the answer for that.
You lose money, I guess.
I've got the answer. No, I've got the answer for that. When bands like that are brought down to Florida at a primary venue, let's say Miami or Orlando or somewhere big, it's always on a Friday or Saturday performance. That's where they get their big buck. The next morning they wake up and go, what are we going to do? We would hire them for Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at a price of about 1/4 of what they paid for that same show in Miami. So if you look back on the calendar when our early shows were performing, they were during the week for a great majority. Now, you can get Donovan in or somebody like that, like we did, who, one person on stage, or Don McLean or somebody like that. But when you bring in the bands, the Chuck Mangionis and all like that, they were Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and that's why we were able to ride in on the coattails of somebody who had already paid all the cost. And this was just a place to kill the day. And we used that very well. Like I said, every Monday night we would call Phantasma Production. They would fax up to us because it was before the time of fax was a big deal then. And they'd fax it up, and we'd sit over there, and we'd go through, and who can we afford, whatever. We'd call them and say, okay, who can we afford, and what's the price? And they'd give us information, and we'd pick and choose, and the ones that fit the budget did it. I mean, that's the ones we hired. But it was always on their second or third date in Florida.
And
somebody else carried the heavy load.
That goes back to what I was speaking to with the Roadhouse. And in the business of presenting, it's called block booking. So there is some larger theater, a larger venue that's located here in the state that is called, what we call in the business, the anchor date. So they're really paying the bulk of the cost because they really want to have this artist come in, which we still have the practice of booking on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, if you ever look at the lyric schedule, which is actually not just about the cheapness, but in our Stuart community, think about all of the activities that happen here on Saturdays and Sundays between golfing, tennis, bridge, fundraising events, sports, fishing, etc., etc. So it's actually been very beneficial, but to Bob's point, that's still the practice. Typically you get the phone call of, hey, this artist is coming through. You're basically gonna be what I lovingly joke to say is the gravy date. So they're gonna be stuck in Florida for about a week. They're gonna be at Miami on, Saturday, and then they're gonna be playing at Tampa on the following Friday night. They're off between Sunday and Thursday. And instead of being off and making it a Florida vacation, they'll kind of take a lowball offer to come and play. But really at the end of the day, in this business, you can bring any act to any venue across America as long as you pay them. But if you notice, we've always been very careful in following the model of the original booking here at the Lyric Theater. The last thing we ever want to do is outprice anybody from this community from being able to afford an opportunity to come see a live performance here at the Lyric. So we're very careful with our selections. Very careful with the selections, and again, this is where too much is owed to the first packs of the Lyric Theater that kind of figured out what is the model, what is the routine, and from there we've just worked at perfecting the operations of maintaining the theater on a daily basis. Any other questions? There were 3 lyric theaters. Correct. Alice? Here, I'll bring the mic over to you.
The Hancock family, Judge Hancock, was the ones who came up with the idea of doing the first theater here in Stuart. It was over on Osceola is where it was located. We've had the picture up there, this small theater, held about 200, 250 people. And as Stuart is growing, because that was 1914, we have more people, especially in the 1910s, moving in. And again, because it was a nice theater that the judge did, people were coming from all over, not just from Stuart. So they found eventually then by the late 1910s, they needed a bigger theater. And the judge thought, let's put it over here by the train station, because it would be seated right where this theater is today, and would be right across from the train station and all the other activities up and down the street. So we built the second Lyric Theater. Again, we've had the pictures up here, and it stayed like that during the late 1910s into the 20s. Well, again, we have another big population boom during the 20s, and we soon outgrow that second theater. So it was Hancock, again, getting mortgage money to help build such an expensive theater this time, the third one. And this one, of course, to last all these decades is quite great.
To that point, I would just like to add on a historical component. This Lyric Theater, the third Lyric Theater in its current position, the panel here talked about how there were 600 seats when they first came and saved it. Well, we now have 500 seats. However, when Judge Hancock built this third Lyric Theater, there were 900 seats, which is why it's kind of disappointing that there aren't any interior photos. Now, I know as humans, we've all grown this way and we've all grown this way from those early days, but our best guess is that the seating, as most movie theaters in that time, was probably pew or bench seating, so you could squish as many people in. And on a historical note, what was so interesting about Judge Hancock was, again, this Lyric Theater has kind of been a catalyst for creating visionaries and risk takers. So in the 1920s, the city of Stuart really was just kind of coming into what we know as a city. I mean, we just recently got paved streets in the 1916, 1917, right? Am I saying that correct? And we just recently started getting like electricity and all these kind of interesting things which take us from being mosquito and farm and chrysanthemum and pineapple territory into kind of starting the birth of a town, with bridges starting to connect us to alternate communities and areas and starting to attract people. When the Lyric was built, this visionary John Hancock, not only did he say, you know what, we're gonna have enough for 900 seats. So we're gonna build this for 900 people because we're across from a train depot and they're gonna come because they're gonna wanna see movies and they're gonna wanna be entertained and they're gonna wanna get out of the fields and they're gonna wanna socialize and meet and greet one another in the town when they come to get their goods. But he was also a visionary in the sense of when this building was built, this was the largest building in Martin County of its day, and it was the first air-cooled building in Martin County. So Judge Hancock was really looking at this kind of future technology and saying, wow, if I squish 900 people into a building that has no, real ventilation, has no doors, has no windows, how am I going to keep them comfortable while watching a movie, entertaining and meeting and greeting? So in all the historic records, it talks about this new air system, NU air system, which from what I can tell and looking at records just seems to be some giant exhaust fans that were on the rooftop that just simply kind of sucked out air every about approximately 10 minutes and dumped and replenished fresh air. But in those 20s, if you think about it, you were carried to town by mosquitoes in those days. There was no, electricity in most of the common household families. There was no fans. There was none of these luxuries that we know today until we hit a hurricane. So again, this theater, really, this Queen Lyrica, as Roy referred to her when he wrote a letter, she has really been a proving ground of allowing for people to have dreams, allowing them to have aspirations, and allowing them to have a vision. And I, too, am a strong believer of Roy's philosophy that buildings, places, and spaces are like humans. And if you sit quietly and long enough, and you listen, and you feel their vibrations, they do start to talk back to you. And they do start to give you dreams and visions of what could be the future. Caretaker of the Lyric Theater and what they call as a role of an executive director, but I couldn't do what I do if I didn't have a board, and I didn't have the hundreds of ushers and volunteers and bartenders and house managers and Lyric staff really that enable this building to kind of turn. I am really just one piece of a cog in a wheel. But what was so important about this special invitation from Mary Jones about being the Historic Preservation Month here at the Lyric Theater and being able to connect Mary's history and family was nothing to do with me or where we are today at the Lyric Theater, but was to really start to pay homage and tribute to the original groups of individuals 30 years ago that said, hey, we can be a not-for-profit organization. We can save this historic building. We can make it become a catalyst and an economic engine to make Stuart and Martin County and the Treasure Coast a viable and attractive place to live, work, and play. So at the end of the day, it's these characters and all of the characters that joined their march and all of the characters that joined before us and who we are here today at the Lyric Theater that made it possible. And they all really, and those who passed before us, deserve that applause, that homage, and that honor. Gentlemen, anything else to add?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Kaya. And by the way, I was trying to decide if I wanted to say this, but Kaya shared something with me last night that the theater is debt-free, and that is such a relief, and congratulations.
And we have you to thank. Going back, I think Bob really drove that point home. It's you, the community. Your tickets that you pay to come see shows do not cover the cost of operating a theater. They barely cover the cost of doing a show.
So it's the community by being patrons, by volunteering their time, by becoming members, by making donations, by telling their friends, by bringing people here to the Lyric Theater. It's really you, the community, that make it possible for us just to be the caretakers, and it's you, the community, that really own the theater, and we thank you.